Good morning, everybody. Good morning. As I begin this morning, as Steve said, my name's Mike. I'm a volunteer here at the Forge. But as I begin this morning, I want to start actually with a confession. With the theme that I'll introduce in a second of our question today, I think you'll see the connection. But I really feel that I need to be honest and give you a confession. All of a sudden, I sort of sense a bit more interest. Some of you kind of leant forward. You were about to go to sleep, weren't you? It's quite big, really, because there is someone in my life who I have consistently lied to throughout our relationship. I would go as far to say as every single time I've seen this person or spoken to them, I have lied to them, like barefaced, blatant lied. I've made false promises. I've made really lame excuses because of those false promises. And so I think it's really important because this person has seen things and knows things about me that not many other people have or do. So I think it's really important, particularly as this is being recorded online, I want to be really open and honest, and perhaps they may even catch up. So I want to really apologize to this person. And that person is my dental hygienist. Emmanuel. I realise the irony of that. Emmanuel, God is with us. And it's not just Emmanuel, to be honest, it's all of his predecessors. Because every single time that Emmanuel or any of his predecessors ask me, do you floss your teeth, Mike, every day? I say, yeah, I do. I guess because of his professional experience, he probably knows I've been lying. And the fact that I keep having to go back to him. But actually, yeah, he would ask me, do you floss? Yeah. Every single time. And actually, I might say, oh, do you know what? I will try. I'll try even better to floss even better next time as I leave. And I have no intention of starting. And then when I come back and I haven't, I go, well, I started for 2 weeks and then it kind of drifted. I never even started. I even made up the fact that I used those TP things. I said, yeah, I've tried using those TP things. I think he knew I was lying as well because he asked me what colour TP I used. I didn't even know they came in different colours, so I picked a colour. His confused look told me he knew I was lying because I said purple and there clearly isn't a purple one. I was telling the truth when I said that I'd spent £60 on an electric water flosser. I wasn't telling the truth to say that I used it religiously every day. I've used it a couple of times and I don't know where it is even now. So yeah, I really feel like I need to be honest and open about that. The good news is that 6 months ago, I had this realization, and it was probably as I was settling my extortionate bill for basically having my teeth cleaned, was that this can't go on. And actually, I wasn't just lying to Emmanuel, who knew I was lying, and I knew he knew I was lying, but I was lying to myself. And so I made a decision that day 6 months ago that I was going to give this a go. I was going to floss my teeth every evening. And I can honestly say, hand on heart, despite all the deceit that I've just shared, I floss my teeth every evening. And Claire can vouch for that, my wife, I have. And I was so thrilled when I went to see Emmanuel and he said, your gum health is extraordinary. I was slightly disappointed that he didn't give me a sticker on the way out, but small steps. So it's important to be honest, and I feel like I needed to share that because this morning is a second part of our series, Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. If you missed the first part last week where Steve introduced us, you can catch up online. I would really encourage you to do that. But basically, it sets out what we're going to be covering this week and for the following 4 weeks. And there is a book to it. And the good news is with this book is that because we're covering this, you don't need to buy it. So how about that? We've saved you some money. So over the next few weeks, we will be looking at each question. But Steve introduced to us the series last week about making better decisions and having fewer regrets. And he shared a verse from Proverbs, which he challenged us to try and remember. Here it is. Let's see. The wise see danger ahead and avoid it, but fools keep going and get into trouble. Wise people, they consider what's coming and take action, but fools carry on blindly for kind of the immediate gains and then maybe get caught out later. And as Steve mentioned last week, and as we'll mention repeatedly through this series, is this. This is the importance around decisions, because our decisions determine the direction and the quality of our lives. Making better decisions will help improve our life. And the reality is, because our decisions tend to impact other people, so making better decisions ourselves can also improve the lives of those around us. But how can we make better decisions? Well, again, Steve was very wise last week. He shared this insight. He said that good questions equal good decisions. In order to make good decisions, we need to ask ourselves at that point some really good questions. So for the rest of this series, we're taking this week and the following 4 weeks and introducing introducing 5 questions, and each of them allow us to take a pause before we make big decisions, to kind of look beyond the moment, to look beyond that short-term gain kind of desire that often leads to us making perhaps bad decisions and then regrets later on. Now, today we're going to look at the first question, and I'm going to be really honest, it's a big one. Actually, it's an uncomfortable question, because it's about our integrity. It's about our honesty. It's about looking at us being honest with ourselves. It's about who you are when no one is kind of looking. And there's a tension here, because where we're going to focus most of today on is in this tension that when it comes to integrity, the truth is that the easiest person to deceive is the person that you look at in the mirror. And the reality is, with making decisions, is that we are really, really good at selling ourselves really, really bad ideas. We are naturally gifted salespeople for bad ideas that kind of float around our heads when we're making decisions. The interesting thing is that generally, when you have a good idea and making good decisions, we don't really have to convince ourselves or sell ourselves those decisions. We might list the pros and cons, we might ask for some advice, but we're not in the form of kind of selling ourselves this decision. So if you find yourself in a position where you're trying to convince yourself and sell yourself, then you're probably likely thinking about something that is a bad idea. And it's funny, isn't it? Because we kind of have 20/20 vision into other people's bad decisions, into other people's mistakes, even kind of as they're making them or before they've made them. We see it, don't we? What are they doing? But the reality is that for some reason we don't see it in our own situations. Whether that's a poor purchasing decision, we see that thing, or we want that thing that we really probably can't afford, but we sell ourselves the dream and we kind of go for it. Or maybe it's a bad relationship decision. You kind of knew at the outset, and actually as it carries on, that it's not going to be the right thing. Maybe you have others around you warning you, but you still go for the relationship. You're convincing yourself, you're justifying it to yourself, you're defending it. Or maybe it's about a job or a work situation. Whatever the situation is, we can find ourselves selling ourselves these bad ideas and therefore decisions. And when we then look back on the situation, we'll say things like, what was I doing? What on earth was I thinking? And in truth, you weren't thinking, you were selling. You were selling yourself that decision. And the reality is, as I said, we'll have all been in this position. Big or small, we will have made a bad decision that we maybe live later or regret later on. How do I know? I've done it. We've all done it. And do you know what? It's highly likely it will happen again in the future. Perhaps some people here today or watching online are really in the middle of selling yourself a bad idea. So what can we do? Well, the starting point to making better decisions and having fewer regrets is this. It's developing the habit of telling yourself the truth. And this is going to sound really harsh, this next bit. But you need to tell yourself the truth, even if it makes you feel bad about yourself. Since denying something that is bad about you or refusing to acknowledge it is actually going to be bad for you in the long run. It's going to trip you up in the future. And so the best way to start telling yourself the truth is to start asking yourself the integrity question that we'll cover today, which is this: am I being honest with myself? Now, actually, the key to this question is not just the question in itself, it's how you ask the question. So you need to repeat this question, and the second time around, you need to add a word on the end, like this. Am I being honest with myself? Am I being honest with myself, really? The repetition and the added emphasis of the word really adds weight to this question, which we need as we are so prone to deceiving ourselves. Things like adding really to these types of questions. Why am I doing this? Really? Why am I postponing that? Really? Why did I say yes? Really? Why am I buying this house or this car? Really? It's challenging, but it's worth it. Because do you know what? Choosing what's best for ourselves isn't necessarily something we're naturally prone to do. It's not natural for us to do. As I said earlier, the easiest person to deceive is the person in the mirror. It's much more natural to sell ourselves what we want to do, not what we ought to do. And there's this psychological phenomenon called confirmation bias. And this is where we know what we want to do, and so all we listen to, search for, and take into account is basically the things that support that thing we want to do, and we ignore everything else. We ignore all the other evidence on the left-hand side of that little diagram. We look for confirmation all the time, and we disregard anything that doesn't support that decision. And this isn't a new thought. In the 17th century, there was this guy called Francis Bacon. I don't know when ruffs went out of fashion, but I guess at some point they might come back. I hope they don't in my time. So Francis Bacon, he basically came up. He was a philosopher and a royal advisor, and he came up with this thought around this phenomenon that we would later call confirmation bias. He said this: the human understanding, when it has once adopted an opinion, draws all things to support and agree with it. And though there be a greater number and weight of instances to be found on the other side, we set aside and reject it. Even if it's outweighed the bad elements of what we're trying to decide, we look for all the things and only consider those things that support our decision. And actually, it goes back even further than that. It goes further back than Francis Bacon. There was another royal advisor who lived around 600 BC. His name was Jeremiah. Now, Jeremiah was one of God's prophets. That's someone who is chosen by God to speak for God and guide God's people. Jeremiah was a reluctant royal advisor. He was actually more of a political advisor. I guess today we would call him a spad, like Dominic Cummings-esque, I guess. I don't think Jeremiah ever went to Barnard Castle, but he was a political advisor. And he advised various kings of Judah. The problem was that not many of these kings actually listened to any of Jeremiah's advice. So we start with a guy called King Jehoiakim. King Jehoiakim, he decides that the money that the kingdom of Judah is paying the mighty kingdom of Babylon for basically their protection is not something that Judah should continue to do. And even worse, he decides that they should switch loyalties to Babylon's archenemy, Egypt. Now, Jeremiah hears about this. He knows it's a really bad idea, and he tries to persuade Jehoiakim to change his mind. Jeremiah knew, that King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon was going to react very, very badly. Now, Jehoiakim, he ignores Jeremiah. King Nebuchadnezzar reacts absolutely as predicted. His huge army lays siege to Jerusalem. He ends up capturing and taking Jehoiakim back to Babylon. You see, one of King Neb's hobbies was to collect kings. So the kingdoms he would defeat, he would take them back to Babylon. He wouldn't just keep them in a nice palatial surroundings. He would put them in the dungeon and all that stuff. He would gouge their eyes out. He would torture them. King Neb was a really nice guy, but he loved collecting kings. So he then installs Jehoiakim's son, King Jehoiachin, keep up, as king. Jehoiachin follows in the footsteps of his father, and he doesn't listen to any advice. He makes some really bad decisions. And after only 3 months, King Neb decides to add to his king collection. So Jehoiachin's out. King Nebuchadnezzar then makes Jehoiachin's uncle, Zedekiah, the new king. Now, King Zedekiah, he would end up being the last king of Judah. Why? Because like all the kings before him, he wouldn't listen to advice. He kept selling himself on bad ideas. One of the ancient Jewish historians said this about Zedekiah. He said this: he did evil in the eyes of the Lord his God and did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet. Zedekiah wouldn't listen. Once he'd made up his mind, sold himself on an idea, he didn't listen to anything else. Because he did exactly the same thing as what Jehoiakim had done in the initial example. He stopped paying Babylon. And Jeremiah does his best to try and persuade him otherwise. Zedekiah doesn't listen. King Neb goes absolutely mad. The whole city of Jerusalem, thousands of people suffer over a long course of time. And Zedekiah then just carries on making a series of bad decisions. And he ends up seeing his family tortured and killed. And that would be the last thing he saw, because King Nebuchadnezzar, you guessed it, captured Zedekiah, gouged his eyes out, took him back to his king collection, the last king of Judah. Jeremiah is living through all these kings making bad decision after bad decision, creating huge regret in their own life, and also impacting the lives, as I said, of those around them, their family and the people that they were leading. These kings who should have known better, who had all the best advice available, made really bad decisions. Jeremiah must have thought, how are they so clueless? What on earth are they thinking? How could they be so deceived? And in one of his writings, Jeremiah's writings, he answers those questions actually, and he explains why not just the kings were prone to self-deception, but why we as people, as humans, are so prone to self-deception. He wrote this: "The heart is deceitful above all things." That's hard to hear, isn't it? The heart is deceitful. Again, Jeremiah isn't just talking about the kings. He's talking about us, people, our hearts. Our hearts are deceitful. It's in our very nature. It's why it's so easy to deceive ourselves about the things that we want to do, not what we ought to do. And Jeremiah goes on. He says that the heart is deceitful and beyond cure. This is a permanent condition. And that just sounds really hopeless and depressing, doesn't it? But it means that we have to be on top of it. We need to be proactive and manage it. And then Jeremiah finishes this verse really interestingly. He says, who can understand it? And the reality is no one can. And it's why we say things after the event like, I don't even understand why I did it. I don't even understand why I decided to even do it. It's the reason why we end up doing things that we would actually advise others absolutely not to, but we end up doing it ourselves. We just can't understand it because it's our natural state for our heart to deceive. And I know this sounds really heavy and uncomfortable and hard to hear, but it's a reality. As I said, we therefore have to be proactive to manage it and keep it in check. How? By being honest with ourselves. So what can we actually do? Well, as I said, the most important thing to do is to embrace this about ourselves. It's a fact that we're more naturally prone to sell ourselves bad decisions and therefore bad ideas and therefore bad decisions. And so maybe for you, the initial self-deceit is in not being able to see what it is that you need to be being honest with yourself about. And maybe these 3 questions may help you identify areas where you're not being honest with yourself. Here's the 3 questions. Where in my life am I most defensive? Where are the things in your life where someone points something out to you and you react really defensively? Could that be an area where you might need to look at how you need to be honest with yourself? Secondly, what in my life do I try to cover up? What do I hide? What do I keep secret from others? What do I want no one else to know? Where do I deceive people to not know what I'm going through? Is that an area where you may need to be honest with yourself? Or thirdly, the third question is, where do I most criticize others? Because it's ironic, isn't it? Sometimes the things that we're most critical in other people's lives are things that are sensitive to us. It's where we get this kind of sense of hypocrite. Where do we criticize others? Is that an area where you need to be more honest with yourself? And once you've been able to identify it, that's when we have to ask ourselves the question that we come to, our integrity question. Am I being honest with myself? Am I being honest with myself? Really? It's hard. I know. I've had to do it. A few years ago, I found myself in a job that I thought I wanted, that I was actually doing an all right job with, but it was impacting my health. I was sinking. It was impacting my relationships. And it actually took Claire, my wife, to point out into me, to say, Mike, what are you going to do about this? And I had to avoid myself from acting defensively. And one day I found myself, actually that evening, looking at myself in the mirror and going, Mike, what are you going to do about this situation? And so the challenge I want to set you this week is to do exactly that. Before you're making any big decision, or maybe you're stuck in the middle of an outcome of a decision, or whatever it might be, have a heart-to-heart with yourself in the mirror. Ask yourself these questions. Say it out loud. It makes it feel more real. And answer it honestly. Even if you have no intention of acting upon it in that moment, you owe it to yourself to know. The most important thing is to begin by being honest with yourself. Because what you don't know, or what you won't know, or what you refuse to know, will eventually hurt you. And it will hurt others around you. So I'm just going to kick off now. I'm just going to list a bunch of questions that you might want to be asking yourself. Maybe that might intersect with something that's going on in your life. Maybe it doesn't connect with anything, but they're good examples of things that you can ask yourself. Here we go. Why do you continue to go out with him or her? Really? Why are you thinking of divorce? Really? Why are you taking that job? Really? Why do you continue in that job? Really? Why are you quitting that job? Really? Why do you keep going on that website? Really? Why do you keep searching things on social media and looking for little videos that are not healthy? Really? Why won't you ask for help? Really? Would you make this decision today? That I will not lie to myself, even when the truth makes me feel bad about myself. I will tell myself the truth, really. Why? Because if you're not telling yourself the truth, you'll be selling yourself a regret. If you're here today and it's either your first time at church or you've been coming not for that long and you're not sure what you believe about all the God stuff, firstly, we are so pleased that you've chosen to be here with us, whether that's here in the church or whether it is online. We're so pleased that you're here with us. And you're so very welcome to be here. Everything that we've spoken about today, everything that we'll continue to speak about in this series is absolutely valid for you, regardless of whether you believe in God or not. Perhaps all of this stuff feels really hard on your own, to be honest with ourselves. But I want to say that we can ask God to help us with this. Now, if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, or perhaps this will act as a reminder, what I'm about to say, but if you're not sure in what or in who you believe, maybe this for you can be the first step in inviting God into your life to help you with this stuff, to be honest with yourself, to help you make better decisions and have fewer regrets. You see, we don't have to be honest with ourselves, about ourselves, by ourselves. We can ask God to help. You see, there was another king who had a heart problem, and he'd made decisions that led to regret. King David of David and Goliath fame, he cries out to God these words: "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you and lead me along the path of everlasting life." Perhaps for you that can be a prayer that you pray today, either for the first time or again. As I close, I want to underline some hope amongst this uncomfortable question. Jesus once told his disciples about the freedom that comes from embracing and living in the truth. He said this: "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Being truthful with ourselves frees us from the mistakes and regrets that come from self-deception. It helps us live a life that's more in line with who we truly are and who we want to be. It can also be about living a life more aligned with Jesus, which brings us true freedom. Facing that truth can be daunting, but it's also incredibly liberating. Maybe there's something that you're not being honest with yourself about that's holding you back. It could be a comforting lie that gives this false sense of protection that feels safe, but is actually preventing you from stepping into that which God has planned for you. Remember, the truth, even when it's hard, will set you free. So this week, I encourage you to confront that truth, no matter how scary it might seem. Because on the other side of being honest with yourself is where you'll find real peace, real freedom, and see a way forward. I really encourage you to embrace this journey towards truth so you can make better decisions, have fewer regrets, and see how it transforms your life for the better. Can I invite you to stand? I'm going to pray. The band are going to sing. Father, would you just enter into this situation? Would you, I just really pray for anyone that is going through something at the moment where they've been trying to sell themselves into a decision. Lord, I just encourage that person and each one of us to be honest with ourselves as we go into this week. Would we be able to pray that prayer where you can help us? Search me, O God. Test me and lead me along a life of everlasting. Lord, we invite you into this. We thank you for this opportunity. We thank you for the truth that comes in your Son, Jesus. Amen.